Back in 2008, I was about to turn 19 and wanted to have a real party for my birthday. I graduated from a private Christian high school the year before and hadn't ever partied, even during my first year at a state university. I just wasn't ever interested because my friends weren't either. I was just a small town girl at a big university who didn't really get noticed, other than by the guys on my boyfriend's dorm floor asking me what I was doing with him. They were hitting on me, but I loved my boyfriend. That year, I decided it was going to be different. I had dropped out of college and broken up with my boyfriend. I had a few new friends who did party, and they seemed to always be talking about how much fun it was to go to house parties. I wanted my 19th birthday to be the first time I got drunk. So I had my older friends help me buy alcohol and invite all of our close friends over to my house. The night came and went. Fun was had, and my friends commented on how great my house was for parties. I lived alone in a 3-bedroom house with an attached garage, so people who wanted to stay over could stay in one of the bedrooms, and people who wanted to smoke had easy access to the garage. My friends really pushed the idea of having more parties, and I loved the thought of meeting new people, so we started partying at my house every weekend. It wasn't hard to get people to come to our parties. It was August, and there were 3 colleges around our town. More than once, my house was full of people I didn't know. I woke up a lot with random strangers in my house, but one of my friends always took responsibility for inviting each stranger over. It was no big deal to me. I would just clean up the house and go to work during the week and have another party on the weekend. These parties weren't crazy or anything. There weren't any drugs involved, just alcohol, which I thought was totally safe. One day in September, when I was leaving for work, I went to shut the garage door and noticed that the garage door remote wasn't on the car sun visor where I usually kept it. I thought maybe it had fallen off, so I got out and searched under the seats. I was more annoyed than scared because I thought I had maybe taken it out while I was drunk to close the garage door instead of using the remote attached to the wall by the entrance into the house. I shut the garage door with the wall remote and went through the house to get back into my car and go to work. That night at work, I clocked out for lunch, and as soon as I entered the parking lot, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. The caller ID just said, "unavailable." I thought it was one of my friends calling me as a prank, because that's something that we did a lot in high school. I answered the phone, expecting someone to ask me something stupid in a weird accent. But instead, there was nothing. What I mean is, complete silence. I thought it was weird, but I just hung up because I didn't want to waste my lunch break dealing with stupid pranks. Everything continued on as normal as I worked the rest of my shift. We closed the store and I was walking to my car when I got another call. It was from unavailable again. The same silence rang through the phone when I answered. Absolutely nothing could be heard on the other line. I really thought it was one of my friends then, because I hadn't had any missed calls, and how would this person be calling me as soon as I clocked out and had my phone on me? My friends knew my schedule, so that was the only explanation. I called my friend Lacey, and she said that she had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't believe her at first, but then her boyfriend verified that she had been with him and they did not call me. I wasn't sure what to think, but I brushed it off and forgot about it as soon as I got home. I had the next couple of days off, and usually on days off, I slept in pretty late. I woke up around 11 the next day and got out of bed. I grabbed my phone and went into the living room. My phone rang, and you guessed it, it was unavailable calling. Again, I heard silence when I answered. This happened a couple of times throughout the day, and I was getting pretty annoyed by then. I was also annoyed that I still couldn't find my garage door remote. I looked everywhere that day and I finally just gave up. I thought maybe it had fallen out of my car somewhere. Fast forward about 3 weeks. The calls started happening every single day. The most unsettling part of this is that they would only happen when I was available to answer the phone. I never had any missed calls during work or when I was asleep. As soon as I would step out of my workplace, unavailable would call. When I would wake up in the mornings, unavailable would call. I really thought it was someone going to some great lengths to play a prank on me, but then even weirder stuff started happening. I stopped parking my car in the garage because it was so annoying to go through the house and to open or close the garage door. One day when I left for work, I backed up and heard a loud scraping noise. I got out and there were huge tree branches underneath my car. I had no idea how they got there or when they got there, but it sure was annoying getting them out from under my car. About a week later, I heard a loud bang at the front door and went to check it out. There was a tree branch sitting on my porch, resting on my front door. This is when I called Lacey, and I basically told her that I had to stay at her house that night because I was terrified. I went to Lacey's and sure enough, Unavailable called. By now, it had been almost a month since this began, and I was so frustrated that I stopped answering. I didn't answer that call, and then about 5 seconds later, Lacey's phone rang. It was from Unavailable. We were super freaked out and I told her not to answer it. I knew then that it was either a mutual friend playing a crazy long prank, or we had a real stalker on our hands. I decided to tell one of my managers at work what had been happening. He immediately told me to call the police the next time I got a call, and that if I didn't call, he would. I told him I would call the police as soon as I got off the phone with Unavailable, when he or she called the next time. Like clockwork, my phone rang as I walked to my car at my break. I called the police after listening to Unavailable silence for a full minute. The police basically told me they couldn't trace the call, but that my phone company could. I got the runaround from the phone company, and despite this, the police wouldn't help. They did say that because this person had probably put branches in weird places, they would send a police officer to watch my house for a couple of days to see if they noticed anything. Nothing but phone calls happened for a week. I wasn't too scared anymore. In fact, I actually started being pretty mean to Unavailable. I called them a coward and asked them why they were doing this. After following up with the police, it seemed like the police didn't really believe that someone was actually on my property. They apologized that I was scared, but said there wasn't anything else that they could do. Tree branches started showing up in the middle of my yard and I would hear banging noises on my front windows at night. For some reason, I didn't feel safe anymore in my room, so I started sleeping on the couch. One night in the middle of the night, I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Unavailable called. I was so scared that I called Lacey and she came over. I didn't understand how this was happening to me because I couldn't see anyone watching me or anything. I never noticed anyone following me or watching me from afar. So what was happening to me? Sometimes there would be napkins inside my screen door or just stacks of blank paper in my yard. I also got markers in my mailbox and sometimes there would be candy wrappers on top of my car. Whoever was doing this was really strange. This went on until Christmas time. On Christmas Eve, I was driving out to my grandpa's farm to have Christmas with them, and I got a call. I was angry by now, and I thought that I could have a holiday in peace. I picked up the phone and started screaming at the person on the other end that it was Christmas, and they should really just let me celebrate it with my family. I called them a freak and asked them what they wanted. I was crying and asking them to just leave me alone, and as always, there was nothing but silence. That night, I was sleeping on the couch and I woke up to lights in my face. Someone was shining several flashlights into my windows. I wasn't sure what to do, so I ran into the bathroom, locked the door, and called Lacey. She drove over and we looked around and found no one. I was so scared, but she stayed over and that made me feel a little more safe. The calls kept coming and the police still did nothing. Nothing else happened outside my house, no branches or weird things turning up. I started sleeping in my room again because I thought that maybe they had backed off. One morning, I woke up and went into my dining room and noticed through the kitchen door window that my garage door was open. I thought maybe it had gotten stuck on something when I put it down, so it had gone back up without me noticing. The door has a sensor so nothing or anyone can get stuck under. I went to the kitchen and shut the garage door with the wall remote. I grabbed a glass of milk and went to sit down at the dining room table, and that's when I saw it. My missing garage door remote was sitting on my dining room table. Of course, I freaked out. I was still in my pajamas, but I ran to my car and drove. I didn't even know where I was going. I just called Lacey and told her that it was time to move. We had been talking about moving to a different city for a while, and I told her that it was time to go. She and her boyfriend came over to check the house with me, but no one was there. Lacey and I got an apartment in a different city, and the call stopped as soon as we moved. I remember it was Valentine's Day and we were having a girls' day out. I told her that I was going to leave my phone at home so that we could enjoy the movie. I asked her if I could leave my phone plugged into her charger that was in the kitchen, and she said yes. Before we left, she had to wait for me to plug it in, and then we left through the kitchen door. So we went out to the movies. We were chatting about the movie on the way back to the car, and I saw something sitting beside my car on the ground. My stomach immediately sunk when I saw that it was my phone. We both died a little and stayed at her boyfriend's house that night, and there was no sign of anyone being in our apartment the next day when we got there. That was the last weird or scary thing that happened to me. Unfortunately, I never got to find out who did any of this. No one has confessed, and I know my friends wouldn't have let me live in a state of constant fear for nearly 5 months. I asked a couple of the random people I had met at some of my house parties, but they had no idea what I was talking about. It was about late November in Colorado, and I was about 7 or 8. My father got the idea of taking us off for a weekend to a cabin that he was going to rent. My mother thought it was a great idea for me, my sister, my father, and her to bond. So that's exactly what happened. We rented a cabin for a few days. We got there and it was sure cold. Well, it was almost December, so I guess it made sense that it was so cold. Anyway, we got all set up and decided where we would sleep. We ate dinner, and while getting ready for bed, we discussed our plans for the following day. That night though, I heard noises outside. It sounded like footsteps. I looked out the window and saw nothing, so I figured that it must have been an animal. I tried to go back to sleep, but then about 15 minutes later, I heard it again. I woke up my sister, who was about 11 at the time, and she heard them as well. We both walked over to the window and saw something out there. We decided it would be best for the thing not to see us, so we went back to sleep. I had a hard time sleeping that night, and so did my sister. But when we eventually woke up, my mother was inside making breakfast and my father was outside. I asked my mom if I could go outside with my dad, and she told me sure, while my sister stayed inside and waited for my mother to finish breakfast. I walked outside and my father was talking to some man, a short, chubby man. He had a shaved head and he was wearing a veteran cap. He looked really nervous too for some reason. He was sweating a lot, and even though it was freezing outside, I walked over to him and my father. My father looked at me and said,
"Oh, this is my son,"
and told him my name. The man looked at me and said, "Nice to meet you, kid. My name's Patrick." He smiled and looked at me. I smiled and greeted him back, and it may have been rude at the time, but I was just a kid, so I asked him, "You look kind of scared. Are you alright?" And he coughed and replied with, "Yeah, I'm fine. I just went through shell shock. You see, I'm a veteran," he said, and afterwards pointed to his hat. My father seemed to really like this guy, and I liked him too at first. He told my father that he had also rented a cabin with his family and that they were really close to us, so he decided to introduce himself. My father invited him inside for breakfast and he stayed. I went outside to play after that with my father and Patrick. While outside, I fell and scraped my knee and started crying. My father was inside at the time because my mother had been calling for him, so I was alone with Patrick. Patrick ran over to me and told me to come with him to his cabin because he had band-aids. I agreed and went with him. While walking with Patrick, we talked about what I liked doing and I told him about video games that I played and stuff like that. It was then that things began to get weird. He asked me what shoe size I was and how old I was. I didn't know my shoe size, which I told him, but I did tell him my age. He chuckled and said something along the lines of, "Good to know." His cabin was nowhere near ours. It took about 20 to 25 minutes to walk there. I was tired and I was no longer in need of a band-aid. However, I decided to keep going since I had already walked for so long. We reached the cabin and he told me to go in first. As soon as I walked in, I realized that there was nobody in there. No family. I asked him where his family was and he didn't answer, pretending like he didn't hear me. He locked the door and that's when I got frightened. He told me, "I'll be right back with a band-aid, kiddo," and walked into the kitchen. He came back and told me to sit and he would put it on. While he put the band-aid on me, he also held my leg with his other hand and rubbed up and down it and told me, "You're rather muscular, kid. I like that." This scared me and I immediately stood up. He asked me what was wrong and I told him nothing, that my leg was feeling much better. I then thought my parents must be worried sick about me and that I should hurry back. He insisted that I stayed a little longer and ate there. I didn't want to, but I was alone, and if I ran, I don't think I could find my way back to my cabin. The door was locked too, so I just agreed and decided to eat with him and get it over with fast. He asked me how much I weighed, and I guessed around 73 pounds. He then had a smile go across his face. He nodded and said, "Perfect weight." I asked him perfect weight for what, but he just kept smiling. I was really weirded out and asked him if I could go. He told me no, and that things were just getting started, and that I shouldn't miss out on the fun. I then heard a big bang come from the bedroom even though the door was closed. Patrick stood up and looked angry. He walked into the room and shut the door behind him. I then heard him yelling something along the lines of, "Did I fucking tell you that you could move? No, stay where you are. I have company." He then walked out with a smile on his face and shut the door slowly. "Sorry about that. It was just my wife. She's really sick and not allowed to be near visitors today." He was smiling while saying that, and I wanted to go. I then looked around the room and noticed that there were clothes everywhere and it was really messy. Now that I think about it, he must have been living there. At that moment, his wife walked out of the room and said, "I'm hungry." He looked pissed and said, "Get back in there." His wife was extremely pale and looked like she had been crying a lot. She was sniffling and had red circles around her eyes. She looked at me and then walked back into the room. I asked him where his kids were, but he didn't answer. He told me that he had kids' clothes that he wanted me to try on, and that was the last straw. I had to get out of that situation and I didn't know how. I started crying and then he hugged me. He told me, "It'll be okay, little one. Nothing is going to happen. Just try on these clothes." He walked in the back room and I thought that was the perfect time for me to leave. I unlocked the door and tried to leave as quietly as I could. I didn't care if I got lost anymore. I just didn't want to take any more chances with Patrick, if that even was his name. I had a feeling that he had been lying, since he had lied about having kids, so who knows what else. I was in the woods trying to find my way back. I was still close to his house, close enough to hear shouting. I heard him yelling stuff to his wife. "Where the fuck did he go? I knew I shouldn't have left him alone. You probably let him leave." I stopped in my tracks. I heard footsteps. I went and hid behind a tree and looked in his direction. He was outside and seemed to be looking for me. I was far enough away to where I could barely see him. He stepped out into the forest and I heard him shouting, "Hey kid, it's okay. You can come back now. You don't have to try on the clothes. I have toys back in my cabin. All you have to do is come back." I then ran. I ran as fast as I could in a straight line in hopes to find someone from my family. I was running away and I thought I heard shouting, but I didn't stop. After what felt like an hour of running, I saw my cabin. I ran to it and my father was outside looking for me. I ran up to him crying and told him that Patrick wasn't a good guy and that he was really weird and was touching my legs and stuff. My father immediately called the person he rented the cabin from and he had said that nobody rented the cabin. My father looked at me and told me to never follow any stranger ever again. We immediately left that day and asked for a refund for the following day. The guy renting the cabins apologized and called the police. The police went to Patrick's cabin and found no one there. They told us that his clothes and belongings were still there. Nothing really happened after that. They asked us questions and left, but they never called us or told us anything about him ever again. Patrick was most likely not his real name, and he probably wasn't a veteran. I just want to know what happened to Patrick and his wife, and how he even had a wife in the first place. I also want to know why he lived in that cabin. He seemed to have been living there for a while, and I guess he left because he figured the police would be coming after him. So many questions remain that will never be answered. When I was 13, I lived in a small town in Virginia. My dad was in the army at the time and deployed. For those of you who don't know, being deployed means that he had to go overseas for a few months up to a year. Unfortunately for us, my dad had to leave for 10 months, so it was just my mom, my younger brother, and I. We had lived in Virginia for about 2 years, and I enjoyed it a lot because I was a sucker for woodsy areas. I was a bit of a tomboy and loved playing outside and skateboarding rather than most girls my age who were starting to get into boys and makeup. I was really close to my dad, so I was pretty upset he had to leave. My mom was one of those cheerleader types who desperately wanted me to be girly. Because of this, the older I got, the more upset I became, and so we weren't very close. My dad had been gone about a month when the new neighbor moved in. We lived in a woodsy area with a half-acre of land with a lake at the end. Our house was normal-sized, 2 stories with my mom's beautiful garden in the back, and there were also a lot of trees that my brother and I loved to play in. My brother Aaron was 10 at the time, and we were also very close. We were out in the backyard running around playing one game when my mom dragged us inside. My mom wanted us to meet our new neighbor who had moved into the house on the left of us. Mom had baked some kind of pasta that Aaron and I tried to eat, but we had to give it to the neighbor. We walked outside and saw a moving truck. The house was really similar to ours, a 2-story house with gray paint and a small front porch. My mom rang the doorbell and then, almost instantly, my neighbor opened the door. She was a woman in maybe her mid-50s and had black graying hair that was extremely long. She had deep wrinkles and dark muddy brown eyes. She gave me the creeps the minute I saw her, and although my mom tried to act polite, I knew she was uncomfortable too. Mom handed the woman the pasta and the woman took it without a word. I later learned that her name was Eugenia. Eugenia's eyes never left mine, even as she took the pasta. I was squirming around uncomfortably while my mom introduced herself and then us. "These are my kids, Aaron and Riley." It seemed like Eugenia snapped out of some kind of trance because she looked at my mom and said in a creepy, croaky-like voice, "Riley, what a lovely name." Then she tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. After that, my mom rushed us home saying we had to cook dinner or something like that. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about the creepy woman. I never thought that she would change my life in the most horrible way. It had been a few weeks since we had met Eugenia, and I nearly forgot about her. She never talked to us and never made any kind of interaction. Until one day, I was walking outside to wait for the bus, and I needed to pass by Eugenia's house to get to the corner where my bus stopped. I kept feeling like someone was watching me, so I looked over at her house and saw her holding a flower that looked to be from my mom's garden and smiling at me from what I assumed to be the bedroom window. She was really smiling this time, with teeth and all. I stopped and looked at her, and I remember feeling my heart drop, even though she wasn't doing anything to me. The worst part was that she wasn't backing away or closing the curtains or anything. I almost missed the bus because it took me so long to look away. After that, things really started to change. First, it was when Aaron and I played outside. We would often feel like we were being watched, and I would look over and see Eugenia standing in the middle of her yard watching us from the chain link fence. It would happen every single time we were outside. At first, I don't think Aaron noticed, But after a while, we stopped going outside as much in fear that she would be there. I don't ever remember her saying anything either. Eventually, we told my mom and she tried to brush it off, saying that Eugenia was probably just making sure we didn't get hurt. It made me really angry that she didn't really try to do anything early on. It was then that the phone call started. Eugenia called our home phone every day, almost always around 3:30 when I got home from school. At first, I answered, not knowing it was her. I would say, "Hello?" And then she would hang up. I stopped answering around the 5th phone call. I told my mom and she said she would answer the next time. When Eugenia called, my mom picked up. Our home phone is in the kitchen and I was in there with my mom doing homework when Eugenia spoke for the first time. "Hello? Who is this? Is Riley there?" She spoke very loud, and my mom and I both instantly knew it was Eugenia. "Yes, she is. Why?" Then she hung up. I later came to the conclusion that she called to make sure I was home. I was fairly certain she watched me get off the bus every day, so I don't know why she called us. One Saturday, my mom chaperoned my brother's school field trip and let me stay home alone. I was pretty nervous because I was hardly allowed to stay home by myself and the phone calls were still coming every day. I was scared of my neighbor, but my mom assured me I was fine and locked all the doors. After about an hour by myself, I started to relax and was downstairs watching some show when someone knocked on the door. I knew it would be hours until my mom and brother were back, so I didn't answer the door in fear it was Eugenia. The person knocked for a solid 30 seconds and then stopped. I thought they would leave, but then they banged on the door really, really loudly. It happened over and over again for about a minute. Terrified, I ran into the bathroom and dialed 911, but didn't call yet. The knocking continued, and then Eugenia's voice yelled, "Riley, I know you're in there, Riley, let me inside." Now, I was even more terrified, but didn't call the cops. After about another minute, she stopped. I didn't come out for another 20 minutes until I could be sure that she was gone. I told my mom the minute she came home, and then she really started to get worried. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor and faced the back of the house. I had a window that looks directly into the backyard. One night I was in my room pretending to smoke a cigarette with one of the rubber things on mechanical pencils. It had been about a month since the incident and she still called and watched me go to and from school. My mom never went to her house to confront her because I begged her not to go to the house in fear that something would happen to her. Eugenia never left the house to my knowledge, so we couldn't talk to her about it outside or out in public. I was facing my window that day, smoking my fake cigarette and listening to music on my iPod when my mom burst into my room. I was surprised and asked her what was wrong because it looked like she was about to cry. "What were you doing with that?" She yanked it out of my hand and I shamefully told her I was pretending to smoke. She was crying and I asked her what was wrong. She told me someone called her cell phone and told her that I was smoking. She was fairly certain that it was Eugenia. The most terrifying part is that in order to see me from the window, you would have to be standing in our backyard. I still don't know how she got my mom's cell phone number. We were all on edge all the time. My brother didn't really know what was going on, but he assumed it had something to do with Eugenia. The fact that mom and I were scared all the time made him scared too. We never played outside anymore, and my mom started driving us to and from school after I told her about Eugenia watching me. But her phone calls to my mom still didn't stop. One time, Eugenia called my mom while I was helping her cook dinner and said something like, "That looks good." We were close to the window in the kitchen, but it faces our other neighbor's house, so I don't know how she knew we were cooking. It had been 7 months and she still harassed me. It was usually phone calls to my mom about whatever I was doing at the time. Whether it was something like reading or doing homework or watching TV, she always told my mom what I was doing, even if my mom was in the room with me. I never asked my mom why she didn't block her number. One day, I heard her call and tell my mom that I wasn't her daughter. I was Eugenia's daughter and she needed to bring me home right away or she would call the cops. My mom called her a psycho, but then Eugenia said something that made my mom cry. I still don't know what it was, no matter how much I have asked her about it. One day, my mom and I got into a fight and I stormed out the front door. I wasn't actually going to go anywhere, but I needed to cool off. I heard Eugenia's door open, and I froze in fear. It was like she was waiting for me to come outside. She emerged, looking worse than usual. It looked like she had dirt all over her clothes and her hair was messy and tangled. I thought she had dried blood on the hem of her shirt, but I'm still not sure. She was holding a container. It looked like rotten moldy pasta, what I am sure was the pasta we gave her. She looked at me right in the eye and then asked if I was hungry and if I wanted to come over and eat. I didn't respond or do anything, just stood frozen. She looked angry and then flipped the container over on her porch, dumping the food out. She never broke eye contact with me as she did this. My mom came outside a minute later and dragged me back in. Nothing particular happened after that for a while. She still called and watched me walk to the bus stop when my mom couldn't drive me. Sometimes I heard my mom cry at night and watch her eyes tear up after the phone rang. We never told my dad, but one night when I snuck downstairs to get a snack, I heard my mom talking to him on the phone about it. They were talking about getting a gun to protect me. I never snuck downstairs after that. After what seemed like an eternity, my dad finally came home. I was 14 and I don't think I have ever been so happy to see someone. It didn't take long for us to be relocated to a city in Texas. I'm fairly certain my dad applied for us to be moved, and I am not complaining. The day we left, Eugenia opened her front door and smiled at me, and then blew me a kiss. My dad flipped her off and then we were gone. We're in Texas now and the phone calls still happen. My mom got a new phone, but Eugenia still found the number. My mom blocked the number, but now she calls my dad and I. When she calls me, she says that she loves me and can't wait for me to come home. I assume that she says the same things to my dad. I blocked her number and my dad did too. We called the police, but they say that there's nothing they can do. It's been over 2 years and she is still obsessed with me. The calls have died down to only a few a month. My mom finally told me Eugenia's last name. I didn't know it before because she refused to tell me. However, I assumed that my mom did some investigating of her own. When I searched her name on Google, nothing really came up. No murders or sexual assaults, just a seemingly normal woman according to the stuff I found. But then, a few searches in, I found an old obituary post mourning the death of a 4-month-old baby that died in her sleep. Her mother was Eugenia, or so I assume, because they had the same first and last name and the date appeared to match how old I assume Eugenia was. If I am correct, which I am sure I am, that would make Eugenia 56. Guess what Eugenia's baby's name was? Her name was Riley. When I found this, I just wanted to go to sleep and wake up with a new name because then maybe none of this would have happened. I would have had a creepy neighbor, sure, but nothing more. But my name is still Riley, and I still have to deal with her. Eugenia might have found this post, but I am not going to delete it. Eugenia, if you are reading this, leave me alone. I am not your daughter, and you are not my mother. If you try to come anywhere near my family, I will make sure the police stop you, or I will find a way to do it myself.